On a sweltering summer morning in the year 1422, the citizens of Constantinople woke to what they assumed would be another ordinary day as the melodious sounds of church bells echoed throughout the ancient Roman capital. The faithful made their way to morning prayers, merchants began opening their shops, and the city's massive walls stood as they had for over 1,000 years, a testament to Roman engineering and the enduring spirit of an empire that refused to die. Suddenly, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by otherworldly sounds that can only be described as thunderous explosions. As the earth beneath them trembled violently, military horns began blaring in the distance, their urgent calls to arms sending waves of panic through the narrow streets. Then, the terrifying news began spreading like wildfire through the city. The full might of the Ottoman army had arrived at the gates of the legendary Theodosian Walls, and Sultan Murad II was determined to succeed where so many before him had failed. In this video, we will explore the dramatic 1422 Ottoman siege of Constantinople, examining not just the military operations themselves, but the complex political circumstances that led to this confrontation, the strategies employed by both attackers and defenders, and the broader implications of this clash between two civilizations at a critical moment in history. This video is made available for free thanks to our YouTube members and patrons. We fund our free content through our program of exclusive videos made for our members and patrons, who get 2 documentaries per week not available to the public. We've got a growing collection featuring the First Punic War, the history of Prussia, the Italian Unification Wars, and a review of the classic text, Xenophon's Anabasis. We're now covering the Russo-Japanese War and Albigensian Crusades, not to mention our massive Pacific War week-by-week coverage, and a massive pool of other projects. All this is made for, and with generous donations from our backers. So if you're enjoying our content and want to both see more and support the cause of history, consider becoming a YouTube member or patron. You'll also get early access to public content, a spot in our lively Discord server, and behind-the-scenes info and goodies. We rely on our backers to support our growing team pumping out these videos, so thank you to everyone already involved, and we hope you'll consider joining in too. To understand the siege of 1422, we must first examine the turbulent events that preceded it and the remarkable young sultan who ordered it. The Ottoman Empire in the early 1420s was a state reborn from the ashes of civil war and internal strife. For over a decade following the catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, the sons of Sultan Bayezid I had torn the empire apart in their struggle for supremacy. This period, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, had seen brother fight against brother, alliances shift like desert sands, and the very survival of the Ottoman state hang in the balance. It was Sultan Mehmed I, often called the second founder of the Ottoman state, who had finally reunited the fractured realm and began the painstaking process of rebuilding Ottoman power. When Mehmed died unexpectedly in the spring of 1421, after falling from his horse during a hunting expedition near Bursa, his eldest son Murad was only 17 years old. The young prince had been serving as governor of Amasya when urgent messengers brought him the devastating news. His father had succumbed to his injuries before Murad could reach him, and for over 40 days, the death was kept secret by Grand Vizier Bayezid Pasha and the palace staff. In an extraordinary display of medieval political theater, court officials dressed the deceased sultan's body in imperial regalia and concealed attendants behind his cloak to simulate movement during audiences, all while Mehmed's corpse slowly decayed in its litter. This macabre deception was necessary because the empire faced multiple threats, and any hint of weakness could trigger another devastating civil war. The young Murad's ascension came at perhaps the most dangerous moment possible. Multiple claimants to the Ottoman throne lurked in various corners of the region, each representing different factions and foreign interests. Mustafa Celebi, allegedly the youngest son of Bayezid I, remained in exile on the Byzantine-controlled island of Lemnos, where he had been confined after his first failed rebellion in 1416. Orhan Celebi, grandson of Suleiman Celebi from the interregnum period, resided comfortably in Constantinople as a potential puppet for Byzantine interests. Meanwhile, Murad's own younger brothers, the princes Mustafa, Mahmud, and Yusuf, represented internal succession threats according to the increasingly institutionalized practice of Ottoman fratricide, where new sultans eliminated potential rivals to ensure stability. The political situation was further complicated by deteriorating relations between the Ottoman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. The aging Emperor Manuel II, who had maintained relatively cordial relations with Mehmed I, had by 1421 ceded much of his authority to his eldest son and co-emperor, John VIII. Unlike his pragmatic father, John represented the war faction in Constantinople, those who believed that Byzantine survival depended on actively undermining Ottoman power whenever possible. The Byzantines had not forgotten that they had once ruled an empire stretching from Spain to Syria, and though they were now reduced to little more than the capital city itself and a few scattered outposts, they remained masters of political intrigue and diplomatic manipulation. Seeing an opportunity in the chaos surrounding Murad's accession, Constantinople made its move. In a calculated act of aggression, Byzantine officials released Mustafa Celebi and his chief supporter, Kunayd Bey, from their exile on Lemnos. Mustafa, presenting himself as the rightful heir to the Ottoman throne, promised the strategically vital Gallipoli Peninsula to Constantinople in exchange for military assistance against his alleged nephew Murad. For the Byzantines, this was a masterstroke of their traditional diplomatic strategy. When unable to defeat enemies through military force, set them against each other and profit from the chaos. By the fall of 1421, Mustafa's rebellion had achieved stunning initial success. Gallipoli fell quickly to the rebel prince, followed by large swathes of Ottoman Thrace. The speed of these victories owed much to widespread discontent with the policies of Mehmed I, whose favoritism toward Turkoman warriors had alienated many in the professional military class known as the Kapikulu. These were the elite soldiers of the Ottoman army, many of whom had been recruited through the Devshirme system and trained from youth to serve the Sultan. They felt marginalized by Mehmed's restructuring of the government, and many saw Mustafa as a champion who would restore their privileges and influence. While Murad frantically recruited an army in Bursa, his Grand Vizier Bayezid Pasha, already stationed in Edirne, led Ottoman forces to confront the rebels near the village of Sazlidir along the Thracian coast. The battle proved disastrous for the loyalists. Large numbers of Kapikulu soldiers defected to Mustafa during the engagement, and Bayezid Pasha himself was captured and beheaded on the insistence of Kunayd Bey. Riding the momentum of this victory, Mustafa Celebi entered the Ottoman capital of Edirne in triumph and proclaimed himself Sultan of Rumelia before roaring crowds who genuinely believed him to be their rightful ruler. However, Mustafa's success proved short-lived due to a series of critical political miscalculations. Almost immediately after securing Edirne, he reneged on his promise to cede the Gallipoli Peninsula to Constantinople, alienating his most powerful foreign backer. Then, in a move that baffled his supporters, he launched an invasion of Ottoman Anatolia, marching on Bursa with an army of approximately 17,000 men. This decision proved deeply unpopular with his Kapikulu contingent, who had joined him expecting to be stationed in the Balkans near their homes and families, not dragged into a campaign across Anatolia. Furthermore, Kunayd Bey, seeing an opportunity to reclaim his former domains around Smyrna, abandoned Mustafa's cause entirely. Without Byzantine financial support and hemorrhaging troops through desertion, Mustafa's position rapidly deteriorated. Murad, displaying tactical acumen remarkable for his youth, efficiently routed Mustafa's crumbling army near the town of Ulubat in January 1422. The rebel sultan, now fleeing for his life with only a handful of loyal followers, retreated back to Edirne, where he seized the Ottoman treasury in a desperate attempt to fund a last stand in Wallachia. But Murad's agents were faster, capturing Mustafa during his flight northward. The execution of this last surviving son of Bayezid I brought an end to the Ottoman civil war, but it also set the stage for the coming confrontation with Constantinople. The Byzantines had gambled on destabilizing the Ottoman succession and lost, but more importantly, they had made an enemy of the new sultan at the very moment when he had an army mobilized and thirsting for vengeance. With Mustafa's rebellion crushed, Sultan Murad II turned his full attention and considerable wrath toward the Byzantines for their role in instigating the recent civil war. In the spring of 1422, he officially declared war on Constantinople, and what followed was one of the most significant military operations of his early reign. The Byzantine capital had been besieged numerous times throughout its long history by Arabs, Bulgars, Rus, and previous Ottoman sultans, yet it had never fallen. The city's defenses were legendary, centered on the magnificent Theodosian Walls, a triple-layered fortification system that had protected Constantinople for over 1,000 years. These walls were engineering marvels of the ancient world. The outer wall stood approximately 27 feet high, fronted by a wide moat that could be flooded with water. Behind this lay a terrace and then the main inner wall, rising to nearly 40 feet in height and studded with massive towers that projected outward, allowing defenders to rain projectiles on any attackers who breached the outer defenses. The walls stretched for miles, from the Sea of Marmara in the south to the Golden Horn in the north, encompassing the entire land approach to the city. Generation after generation of Byzantine defenders had manned these battlements, and the walls had become as much a symbol of Roman continuity as the imperial throne itself. Despite his youth, Murad had already gained considerable military experience during his father's reign and the recent civil war. He was determined to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, Bayezid I, who had also besieged Constantinople decades earlier. More importantly, the young sultan needed to prove himself. At only 18 years old, he had to demonstrate to his soldiers, his nobility, and his rivals that he possessed the strength and vision to lead the Ottoman Empire. A successful siege of Constantinople would not only punish the Byzantines for their treachery, but would also establish Murad's credentials as a warrior sultan worthy of his lineage. While regional Ottoman commanders swiftly seized the Byzantine city of Nicomedia and various settlements in Thessaly, Murad and his new Grand Vizier, Kandarli Ibrahim Pasha, organized the main assault. The Ottoman strategy was ambitious: simultaneous sieges of both Constantinople and the important Byzantine stronghold of Thessalonica. This dual operation would stretch Byzantine resources to the breaking point and prevent Emperor John VIII from concentrating his limited forces at either location. The siege of Constantinople began in earnest during the early summer of 1422. Ottoman forces, numbering in the tens of thousands, established their positions around the Theodosian Walls and began the methodical process of attempting to breach these formidable defenses. For the first time in the history of sieges against Constantinople, the Ottomans employed gunpowder artillery on a significant scale. Cannon fire boomed day and night, the sound of explosions replacing the peaceful church bells that normally marked the hours in the Byzantine capital. These early Ottoman cannons were primitive by later standards, prone to malfunction and slow to reload, but they represented a terrifying new dimension of warfare. The psychological impact alone was enormous, as the defenders realized they faced weapons their ancestors could never have imagined. An eyewitness to the siege, a Byzantine named John Cananos, left us a detailed account of the Ottoman operations. He describes how Sultan Murad ordered the construction of an immense earthen rampart extending from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, essentially creating an elevated platform from which Ottoman troops could discharge volleys of projectiles against and over the land walls. From this rampart, catapults hurled massive stones while archers sent clouds of arrows arcing over the battlements. The newer cannons, still experimental but increasingly effective, fired iron and stone balls that slammed into the ancient walls with tremendous force. The constant bombardment created an atmosphere of terror within the city, as civilians huddled in their homes while debris from shattered buildings rained down in the streets. The Ottoman assault was not limited to artillery bombardment. Murad's forces launched repeated infantry attacks, attempting to overwhelm sections of the wall through sheer numbers and ferocity. Ottoman engineers worked to undermine the walls, digging tunnels that they hoped to collapse, creating breaches through which assault troops could pour. Meanwhile, the Ottoman fleet, though not as formidable as it would become in later decades, attempted to blockade the city from the sea, cutting off potential reinforcements and supplies that might arrive by water. The Byzantines found themselves besieged on all sides, their once mighty empire reduced to a single city fighting desperately for survival. Inside Constantinople, the defenders rallied under the leadership of Emperor John VIII. The Byzantine military, though greatly diminished from its former glory, remained disciplined and motivated. These men were not fighting for conquest or plunder, but for their homes, families, and the continuation of a civilization that stretched back over 11 centuries. The defenders manned the walls in shifts, maintaining constant vigilance as Ottoman forces probed for weaknesses. Byzantine engineers worked frantically to repair damage caused by cannon fire, often under direct fire from Ottoman positions. The city's limited garrison was supplemented by armed civilians, monks, and even women, all contributing to the defense in whatever capacity they could. The siege dragged on through the hot summer months, with both sides suffering considerable casualties, but neither achieving a decisive advantage. The Theodosian Walls, though battered by cannon fire, proved resilient. Byzantine engineers had designed these fortifications to absorb and distribute the impact of siege weapons, and while individual sections might be damaged, the overall integrity of the defensive system remained intact. More importantly, the defenders' morale stayed remarkably high. The Byzantines had survived sieges before, and they believed their city was protected not just by stone walls but by divine providence. A particularly dramatic moment came on the 24th of August, when Ottoman forces launched their most determined assault. A much-revered imam in the Ottoman camp, a learned man called Sheikh Bakari who claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad, had prophesied that Constantinople would fall on this specific date. Inspired by this prediction, Ottoman commanders threw everything they had into the attack. Wave after wave of soldiers rushed the walls, carrying ladders and siege equipment, determined to fulfill the prophecy and claim the eternal glory of conquering the Byzantine capital. The battle raged for hours, transforming sections of the walls into scenes of desperate hand-to-hand combat as Ottoman troops managed to scale the battlements in several locations. But the Byzantine defenders proved equal to the challenge. Fighting with the courage born of desperation, they repulsed each assault, throwing back ladders, pouring boiling liquids on attackers, and engaging in brutal melee combat when Ottoman soldiers managed to gain footholds on the walls. The prophecy went unfulfilled. As darkness fell on the 24th of August, it became clear that Constantinople would not fall that day, or perhaps any day soon. The failed assault dealt a significant blow to Ottoman morale. Soldiers who had been promised divine favor in capturing the city now began to question whether they were truly destined to succeed. For a total of 63 days, Sultan Murad rained destruction upon Constantinople. The suburbs of the great city were largely burned, and substantial portions of the outer defenses were damaged. Yet the essential fact remained: the Theodosian Walls held, and the Byzantine defenders showed no sign of surrender. Murad found himself in an increasingly difficult position. His army, while large and well-equipped, was not infinite. The costs of maintaining tens of thousands of soldiers in the field were substantial, and the longer the siege continued without results, the more his domestic rivals might begin to question his capabilities as a military leader. Then, in late August, devastating news arrived from Anatolia that would force Murad to make a fateful decision. His younger half-brother, a 13-year-old prince named Mustafa, but known in Ottoman historical records as Little Mustafa to distinguish him from the recently executed rebel, had revolted and seized the important city of Nicaea. Even more alarming, the young prince had secured military assistance from multiple Turkic beyliks, including the Kandarids, Karamanids, and Germanids. These were regional powers that Murad's father had worked hard to subordinate to Ottoman authority, and their support for a rival claimant represented a potentially existential threat to Ottoman control over Anatolia. The rebellion had been orchestrated with Byzantine assistance. Emperor Manuel II, playing his final hand in the great game of regional politics, had released Murad's other two younger brothers, the princes Mahmud and Yusuf, from their comfortable captivity in Constantinople. These princes were now also in Anatolia, ready to serve as alternative figureheads for anyone dissatisfied with Murad's rule. Additionally, the perpetual troublemaker Kunayd Bey had recaptured the city of Smyrna and re-established the independent Aydinid Beylik, further fracturing Ottoman authority in the region. Faced with this crisis, Murad was forced to make a choice that must have been agonizing for a young sultan eager to prove himself. He could continue the siege of Constantinople, hoping for a breakthrough before the situation in Anatolia spiraled completely out of control, or he could abandon the siege and deal with the immediate threat to his eastern territories. The decision was made easier by the lack of progress against the Theodosian Walls and the realization that even if he eventually breached them, the cost in time and lives might leave him too weak to effectively deal with his Anatolian problems. In early September 1422, Murad gave the order to lift the siege. The Ottoman army struck camp and began the march toward Anatolia, leaving Constantinople battered but unbowed. The withdrawal of the Ottoman forces was greeted with jubilation in Constantinople. Church bells rang out across the city, and prayers of thanksgiving were offered in every church and monastery. The Byzantines had once again demonstrated that their capital, protected by its magnificent walls and defended by men of courage, could withstand even the most determined assault. Emperor John VIII, whose hawkish policies toward the Ottomans had helped trigger the crisis in the first place, could claim a defensive victory, though the true cost of Byzantine interference in Ottoman affairs was yet to be fully reckoned. For Sultan Murad, the siege represented both a frustration and a learning experience. He had not captured Constantinople, but neither had he suffered a crushing defeat. His army remained intact and capable of further operations. More importantly, he had demonstrated to the world that the Ottoman Empire under his leadership was a force to be reckoned with. The young sultan quickly crossed into Anatolia and dealt with the rebellions with decisive efficiency. Catching little Mustafa off guard, Murad swiftly recaptured Nicaea and executed his rebellious half-brother. His other two younger brothers, Mahmud and Yusuf, were captured and confined in Bursa, where they would die during a plague outbreak in 1429, conveniently removing them as potential rival claimants. Murad then turned his attention to the Turkic beyliks that had supported the rebellion. Through a combination of military force and diplomatic marriages, he brought these wayward vassals back under Ottoman control. He invaded and re-vassalized the Kandarids, arranging a marriage between his sister and the beylik's heir. He himself married the daughter of the Kandarid ruler, Hattis Halim Hatun, further cementing the alliance. When the Karamanid ruler Mehmed II Bey died suddenly during his own siege operations, his successor Ibrahim II Bey sought peace with the Ottomans. In exchange for the return of certain territories, Ibrahim married another of Murad's sisters, and peace was re-established between Edirne and Konya. The childless ruler of the Germanids, Yakub II Bey, simply surrendered his entire domain to Murad, while the Mentesh and Teik Beyliks were fully annexed into the Ottoman Sultanate. Perhaps most satisfying for Murad was the final defeat of Kunayd Bey, the persistent rebel who had defied Ottoman authority for over 2 decades. Kunayd had been a supporter of multiple failed claimants during the Ottoman interregnum, had participated in Mustafa the impostor's rebellions, and had most recently re-established the Aydinid Beylik in defiance of Ottoman sovereignty. In 1425, he was finally defeated by local Ottoman governors working in partnership with Genoese forces. His capture and execution marked the end of the short-lived re-established Aydinid Beylik and the complete Ottoman annexation of the region. The siege of Constantinople in 1422, though ultimately unsuccessful in its immediate military objective, represented a significant moment in the complex relationship between the Ottoman and Byzantine empires. For Constantinople, it was another victory snatched from the jaws of destruction, proof that the Queen of Cities could still defend herself against overwhelming odds. The Theodosian Walls had once again lived up to their reputation as the greatest fortifications in the world, and the spirit of the Byzantine defenders had shown that decline in territory and resources did not necessarily mean decline in courage or capability. Yet the siege also revealed uncomfortable truths about the Byzantine position. Constantinople had survived, but barely, and only because Murad had been forced to abandon the siege due to problems elsewhere in his realm. The Byzantines had no field army capable of relieving the siege or taking the offensive against Ottoman positions. They were entirely dependent on their walls and on the hope that any future attacker would face similar internal problems that would force them to withdraw. Byzantine diplomatic maneuvering, while clever, had ultimately backfired, turning a potentially manageable relationship with a new young sultan into active hostility without achieving any lasting advantage. For the Ottoman Empire, the 1422 siege was a demonstration of growing military capability, particularly in the realm of gunpowder artillery. Though the cannons of 1422 were not yet powerful enough to breach the Theodosian Walls, they represented the future of siege warfare. Ottoman engineers and founders would continue to improve their designs, casting larger cannons capable of firing heavier projectiles with greater force. When Constantinople eventually fell in 1453, it would be Ottoman artillery, vastly improved from these 1422 models, that would play a decisive role in breaching the walls that had protected the city for over a millennium. The siege also marked an important phase in Sultan Murad II's development as a ruler and military commander. Within the first 18 months of his reign, beginning when he was only 17 years old, Murad had faced and overcome extraordinary challenges. He had crushed 2 significant rebellions, conducted a major siege of one of the world's most famous cities, and reclaimed large portions of Anatolia for the Ottoman Sultanate. These experiences forged him into one of the Ottoman Empire's most capable sultans, a ruler who would go on to expand Ottoman power deep into Europe and preside over a golden age of military and cultural achievement. The relationship between Constantinople and Edirne would continue to be complex and often hostile in the decades following 1422. The Byzantines would continue to seek allies among European Christian powers, hoping to organize a crusade that might relieve the mounting Ottoman pressure. The Ottomans would continue their inexorable expansion, each generation of sultans building upon the achievements of their predecessors. When Murad's son, Mehmed II, would finally capture Constantinople in 1453, fulfilling the dream that had eluded his father in 1422, it would mark not just the end of the Byzantine Empire, but the beginning of a new phase in world history. The 1422 siege stands as a testament to the resilience of medieval fortifications, the courage of desperate defenders, and the complex political calculations that shaped the late medieval period. It reminds us that history is rarely simple, that sieges are as much about politics, logistics, and morale as they are about walls and weapons, and that even the mightiest empires must sometimes retreat in the face of overwhelming circumstances. The Theodosian Walls had held, Constantinople had survived, and the Byzantine Empire, though diminished and surrounded, would endure for another 3 decades before finally succumbing to the relentless pressure of Ottoman expansion. Thanks for watching. To ensure you don't miss any video regarding history, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. This is the Neural Battlefields channel, and we will catch you on the next one.